Jean-Christophe, Graz, despite the animals on the rails, despite the problems with the trains, came from Lausanne or Geneva? Lausanne. From Lausanne for us. Thank you very much for being here on time, everything perfect. You are a specialist of international economics, international trade, international relations. You will talk about deglobalization. And so we are happy to host you for your talk for 45 minutes to 1 hour. And then we have the discussants for 15 minutes, not more, reply from you, and discussion with the whole audience. Is that fine?
Fine.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for this invitation, and sorry for the little delay due to unexpected events indeed on the rail track.
Just withdraw this because we don't understand why.
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
Except if you are talking about quanting things. Yes.
So today I will talk about deglobalization, asking the question, is this for real now? I'm sure that any one of you in this room has heard about deglobalization because it did not take Donald Trump a second term in the White House to come with deglobalization at the top headlines of the media almost on an everyday basis. And actually certain terms used back several decades or even in a longer history of capitalism can also be related to the current debate on deglobalization. But it's clear that 2025, not a single day seems to go by without statement from the President Donald Jr. Trump, targeting one aspect or another of globalization as we know it. So what I suggest today, this afternoon, is to take a little step back and try to reflect on the nature of current transformation of globalization. And I will do that in 3 ways, basically 2.5 or 2.1, on a few words on the background and what kind of issue we're talking about, and then some discussion and a review of various ways to frame this debate on deglobalization, and finally just a few words on the way forward, what I have not done yet, as you may imagine. Just as an introduction, first of all, I'm not an economist, so forgive me for that. I'm a political scientist, but in the domain of international political economy, global political economy, so treating economic phenomena from a political and international relations perspective. And the text that supports this talk, as mentioned in the paper you received, is a first draft of a book I'm working for, which would be a repère, a collection repère at the publishers La Découverte, is some sort of a dense 128-page synthesis, a book a bit like the Cambridge Elements, if you know that. Okay, so that this type of series. So the chapter is basically the chapter framing the analysis on which the empirical dimension will come afterwards. So I don't give you much of the empirics this afternoon as well, but we will discuss that. Okay, first background and globalization and the fire. And so let's start with a few quotes, 3 quotes, and guess about the authors. But before that, sorry, I don't see exactly the same thing here. Yeah, the research question of the whole book, if you want, is this one. What is the nature of current transformation of globalization and its governance mechanism? And to respond to this question, so we will go through some background issues and also the framing exercise will come afterwards. But before that, so we will start with 3 quotes. The first one, I'll let you, can you read from the back? So move forward. So I read it for everyone if you can't read. In the past decades, it's too small here. Okay. In the past decades, new powerful and increasingly assertive centers have been formed. Each of them develops its own political system and public institutions according to its own model of economic growth and naturally has the right to protect them and to secure national sovereignty. We will never follow the road of self-isolation and autarky, although our so-called Western friends are literally dreaming about this. Moreover, we're expanding cooperation with all those who are interested in it, who want to work with us, and will continue to do so. So this is the first quote. Have a guess of the author. Now, we will come afterwards, so keep it for yourself. And we'll see. So I heard, oh no, we can try. Xi Jinping, Trump. Trump. Xi Jinping, who, what else? Who else? Any guess? Lula? Yeah, Lula. Narendra Modi, none of them, maybe. Anyone else? Putin, maybe. We will see. Let's go to the next one. Globalization is almost dead, and free trade is almost dead. A lot of people still wish they would come back, but I don't think they will be back. So I have a vast majority for Trump. Okay, let's go to the next one. Foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream. But it is not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen. In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Who can this be? Okay, let's see. First one, Putin. So it was 4 months after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And you see that through this quote, someone claiming leadership from a big power status, supporting new assertive emerging powers, and also some openness towards polycentrism in the world. Now, maybe you don't know that guy, but he's very, very rich. Not as, probably maybe even richer than Trump. And so he's the former vice president of Texas Instruments and founder of this largest semiconductor factory firm, TSMC. And this was one when he opened one of those new factories, repatriating production of semiconductors in the United States. And so you see this also discussion of globalization in relation to the new geographies of investment, and but also the contradictory dimension of, or the more maybe detailed reading we should have when we discussed reciprocal tariffs, because as you may know, semiconductors were exempted of the 145% tariffs between China and the United States, because this is an important dimension when importing the semi-processed goods used in the whole supply chains. And of course, the last one was Trump, 2-0, a few months after his inauguration. It was a famous speech in the Rose Garden. What is interesting to see, if you can see, is the type of public in front of whom he's talking. For once, it's not in the Oval Office. Maybe there was not enough space to have also representative of the unions, of workers, you see with yellow vests, etc. So this is also the new populism of Trump, replacing taxes on income tax by tariffs to from foreign imports. Okay. So this tells us a little bit of the new borders of these United States of America. Of course, the reciprocal tariffs, this is completely new. I will not get into the detail here because this would bring us a bit too far. But as you know, this is completely off the multilateral trade regime of the WTO, and it cannot be even settled within the WTO because the United States, even before Trump, blocked the nomination of new judges in the dispute settlement body of the WTO. So there is no more, if you want, court regarding trade at the multilateral system. A more specific dimension is this new understanding of the supply chains for the United States, which is sometimes defined as a non-red supply chain to counter China, so anything but China in terms of reorganization of the supply chain. And here you have the first stone of this factory, which was built at by TSMC, sorry, you have it here, in 2022, and with clearly AI also one of the core strategic dimension in this new war regarding computing power, which depends, of course, on the production of a huge amount of chips. But this is not enough. So you have trade, you have production, but you have also, of course, the broader political environment and the new understanding of the world order and the structure of the relationship between the United States and the rest of the world. I will not discuss this new map of the world, but what is important also is that this reorganization of the international relation of the United States is makes, in a certain sense, the US looking like emerging powers with a lot of uncertainty, and this is the argument put forward by one of the columnists of the FT, and calling the United States a new Caligula capitalism. Caligula was a Roman emperor who stayed in power for only 4 years, but who is well known to have been able to destroy a lot of power of the Roman Empire within the 4 years only. And so the argument is basically to consider that within 4 years you can pass the status of the United States from a big power to an emerging power, with uncertainty, issues related to corruption, weakened institutions, failed states, the weakening of democratic standards, violence, social polarization. You have all those dimensions that you find now on a daily basis in the US, which is how emerging powers have been characterized to define the higher risk they represent in terms of the organization of the global political economy. And finally, here you have the burning dollar, which refers to the not yet implemented agreement, Mar-a-Lago Accord. Have you heard of this project? No? So maybe just a few words. In the first couple of months, basically, of the new administration of Trump 2.0, there was a lot of discussion of a new international monetary agreement to devalue the dollar against all other currencies and to force basically a devaluation of the dollar, which would be brought about by a swap of US treasuries from, say, 5 or 10 years US treasuries, or even possibly 30 years US treasuries, into 100 years treasuries. So the bonds, the owners of the bonds emitted to finance the debt of the United States would be forced to basically to own dollars for almost indefinitely on a very lower value. And on top of this, the idea would be to renew security agreements on the basis of agreement on this type of swap of US Treasury's ownership. So it has not yet been implemented, but it's still on the shelf, and it could be a major transformation also of the status of the dollar in the international economy. Okay, so if you see the names of Zoltan Pozsar, no. This one? I think it's like this. ZS, yeah. And Stephen Miran. You'd better be careful for the dollars you have in your wallet. Okay, so this is about US structural power, but does not inform us really on deglobalization beyond the United States. So for that, we have also to be aware of a shift in global governance. The world, as we used to know it, has been for a long time defined by three worlds: the West, the East, and the South. There was a couple of years ago, I think, an article which fed quite a debate in international affairs by an author called John Ikenberry. Doesn't work anymore. Yeah, John Ikenberry, you have it here, and who considered, okay, we have to consider now a new world where basically the West and the East compete each other to gain the support of the South. But with Trump, clearly we don't have such a West, and the South is also much more divided between a new type of West, or a new type of the US leading the West, and the rest of the West. So we'd rather have something like a situation, a process where we are leaving this type of legalized liberal multilateralism to what could be defined as a transactional illiberal bilateralism. Okay, and so you have, it's not based on law, but based on transaction. A deal is a deal. It's not based on the principle of liberalism. So it's based on principle basically of power, and it's not based on rules which are unified and supposed to be the same for all the players, but based on the bilateral deals agreed upon and based on power plays. Okay, so this is a bit about the process or the formal change we can see not only in the US but at the global level, but doesn't tell us much about the substantial state and processes of political economy transformations. So for that, it's important to get into a more substantial framing of this concept of deglobalization, and this is the second part of my presentation right now. So first things first, a few words about the words, semantics. First of all, the word global is not exactly the same thing as globalization as such. Global refers to a whole, which is different to the sum of the parties. And so when we talk about a global, we talk about something which has genuine attributes beyond those cumulative features of phenomena happening here or there, etc., etc. And in the text, you saw that I referred to an author, a theorist, basically, in international relation theory, Jens Bartelsen, who discussed that in an interesting text, and defining global as sui generis, and as a social fact in its own right. So there is something different about the global than just the whole ontology on which this global claims some sort of characteristic or attributes. So this is the first important thing. Then regarding globalization, and here I refer to a famous handbook in international relations, The Globalization of World Politics. We must understand this as some sort of an epiphenomenon resulting from recent processes characterized as transformation of an order which used to exist previously. And what is this process? It can be defined, first of all, globalization is less a status than a process. So this is some practice happening and coming from some past practices. And this results from those recent transformations of also the scale at which we see the transformation of organization, of human organization, power relation, etc., etc. I think this is more or less an adaptation of definition of globalization that you see in this type of literature. What is important is the territorial aspect of this transformation. So we have a social logic which can be defined as detached from the territorial logic of state sovereignty. So it's almost the butterfly effect, if you want. What you have done here behind your screen may have effects in Taiwan, in Tahiti, or in Timbuktu. And this is a way to understand what has completely changed in terms of globalization. It can have effect in Taiwan, Tahiti, and Timbuktu, independently of the fact that state sovereignty remains. So it doesn't mean that everything is erased, but there are some new social processes taking place detached from state sovereignty, from the territorial logic of state sovereignty. Okay. And now just a few words about another understanding of re-globalization. Actually, a couple of years ago, the World Trade Organization published its annual report on the theme of re-globalization. When I saw that, I said, oh, this is interesting. This is another take of globalization, but the WTO being what it is, independently of the fantastic work done by its secretariat on the shore of the Lake of Geneva. Actually, it was mostly a new way to fight against the risk of fragmentation of the multilateral system. And then you see is basically globalization with a human face, integrating more people, economies, and pressing issues into global trade and strengthening multilateral cooperation. So this is not exactly what we talk about when we discuss deglobalization. So what about deglobalization? Already 30 minutes passed almost, and we haven't discussed deglobalization. So regarding some initial conceptual question, the first issue is really important to distinguish between process and a condition. So what we are seeing right now is a profound change in the process of ways of exchanging goods, services, investing, state behaviors, etc. But the condition of a highly integrated world is still there. So there is maybe a stalled, perhaps reversed process, yet the condition remains. And this is an argument made already 10 years ago, already by Jeremy Green in a book whose title is Globalization Over? 2018. Then it's important to keep in mind this tension between liberal internationalism and state sovereignty. Basically, you have had over the last, since basically the recent wave of globalization, which followed the end of the Cold War, so since the 1990s, basically, attention and also back and forth of globalization and deglobalization, already in the 1990s. And this is why I take this quote, rephrased here, of Compost and Paul. Even when the balance tilts toward globalization processes, there are also deglobalization processes occurring simultaneously. For instance, if we take in the end of the 1990s, there were so 25 years ago, very strong pushes for more integration of financial markets. But you also had the start of the alter globalist movement, which was very strong in different demonstrations before 9/11. You had huge demonstration, more than 1 million people in Genoa in 2001, just a month before 9/11. So you had really those both forces together. And if you take the same tension, but at a higher abstract level of understanding, this basically refers to this tension between transnational capitalism and a capitalism which actually takes place in a system of fragmented political authorities. And this understanding of the tension is what has been put forward by a number of scholars in international political economy in the early debate on globalization. Depends if it's the cable that I use myself. Mm-hmm. So go ahead. Okay. Okay, well, there is another cable here, but I'll stay discreet. So this argument comes back and back and again, also during the COVID. This is the end of globalization. You see here, I took a quote from Lucas Lindsay, who is a professor of international political economy in Groningen in the Netherlands. And you see that this dates back clearly before also the abrupt exercise we had during the COVID. It's not only throughout the last wave of globalization, but actually it's date back to the early days of commercial capitalism, or even some financial or commercial capitalism since the 16th century in a certain sense. And this is why I quote also Fernand Braudel, whom I know you know perfectly well, and you've discussed in many other seminars, I'm sure. And Braudel has this fantastic quote saying, capitalism has made its way, sometimes hindered, sometimes favored, but capitalism always wears 7-league boots. So the relationship between state and capitalism has always been there, and it moves in one way or another depending of basically conjunction of balance of powers. Okay, so what you can take so far is there is a shift in the process, yet the condition is still there. The condition of a highly integrated world is still there. And this also refers to considering the global as a category in itself, sui generis category, and to understand this tension between the global scale, if you want, of transnational capitalism and the continuing existence of state sovereignty and power. So we can now move maybe a step further into this this conceptualization of deglobalization, and also clearly a further step would be to understand the various forms of this process across issues, concerns, what takes place in trade, what takes place in finance, in production, in migration, in health, might be different according to the forces and the balance of power between state and transnational capitalism in those different issues. Okay, so far so good? Well, so we can go on. So to move forward, it's important to ask oneself, basically, what is the target? Deglobalization is a process against a condition. So what form of integration is called into question? And depending of the response given to this question, so we will not talk about the same thing. And basically there are three targets, or at least one typology of the debate can be organized or framed in such a way as to identify three targets. The first target is the excess of the liberal international economic order. And so we can understand deglobalization and some sort as a backlash against neoliberalism, if you want to make it short. The second target is excessive risk in capitalism. Excessive risk in capitalism because clearly the level of integration and the speed of the process of integration has brought also new threat, risk, uncertainties, which are identified as problems for financial and production processes. So deglobalization is seen there as a new way to mitigate those risks. Third target is maybe more diffuse or maybe more at a higher structural level. And this target, the identification of the target, might be maybe either here or maybe behind the target. It draws upon the mercantilist tradition, which has been renewed now in a debate called a debate reframe in terms of geoeconomics. Geoeconomics, you have heard of it, I'm sure now, because it's quite fashionable as a research program. And basically, it's a new competition with US supremacy, and more specifically, how China as an emerging power is threatening the status of supremacy that the United States has gained after the end of the Cold War. Three targets, so we will discuss those three targets a bit more in detail right now. First target, backlash against liberal international order, and the response is therefore some sort of a re-embeddedness of societies, meaning re-embeddedness of the economy into societies. If you have read or heard of Karl Polanyi, The Great Transformation, okay, so this is a bit a way to understand this this type of deglobalization process. It has been pushed by rising inequalities. I'm sure you have seen this graphic already of Milanovic, the elephant curve. I know it doesn't ring you a bell. Well, some of you have seen it. So it's a fantastic representation of rising inequality. The different repartition of income growth through the last wave of globalization since the 1990s. And if you see here, so this is on the left-hand side you have the growth of income, and on the I never know, it's the X here or the Y, and the X here, yeah, X. On the X you have the percentile of wealth, and so on a worldwide basis. So basically, except for the 5% of the poorest people in the world, you have 50% of the poorest people of the world who gained income or with globalization quite massively. And then you have this part here, the people who own more or less a third richest part of the world, which either didn't gain anything or lost. So this is the middle class and the lower middle class and the working class of the rich countries in the world. So this is the flew over of the US, and when we discuss the whole middle of the US, this is a lot of people in European countries, etc., etc. And then here you have the super rich, the 1% or even 0.1% or 0.1% of the richest people in the world who gain a lot throughout globalization. So clearly, after several decades, this type of process feeds also a backlash. And if you don't understand that there is an economic logic in it, of course, you can have another understanding, which, as you know, is massively mobilized by the far-right parties in France, but not only in France, in Switzerland as well, in many countries around the world. And of course, this is also the Trump discourse. So this is the nationalist and identity-based turn of deglobalization is very closely related to this dynamic, but not only. There are many studies in political science which discuss the relation between material and immaterial dimension of deglobalization. Another part of the debate is on the new way of understanding global governance. And these new ways of understanding global governance are discussed by concepts such as polycentrism, pluriverse, alter globalization, of course, post-growth, degrowth, and also the whole question of gaining some autonomy on a local basis as and not necessarily in opposition to the global basis. I will not go into detail here because I'm sure you are aware of this discussion. And finally, what is important to keep in mind here is to have this new process which aims at having some sort of a selective reinsertion of the national economy into the global economy, but only so on a selected dimension. And the ultimate aim of it is to protect living modes and human and non-human welfare. The snail here, do you know what it refers to? Degrowth, yeah. You have seen it already, I'm sure, because some of you are from Vienna. Yeah, so you know that. Okay. Risk attenuation. So this is the second target. Deglobalization is a new way of mitigating risk in the capitalist economy for financial, but also financial markets, but also production chains, etc. And a first wave of this type of deglobalization is not so new either, because already in 2005, The Economist had a special issue on nearshoring. And nearshoring at that time was to offshore production, not in China. China was already the problem, but in Central and Eastern Europe. Because in Central and Eastern Europe, which is called nearshoring, it's less instead of offshoring, you had maybe slightly higher wage, but also higher skills, and you had the advantage of the proximity and the inclusion of the countries or the national economies already into the European Union. So law, securities, institutional homogenization, etc. The second way of understanding this risk mitigation is what is called sometimes securization of supply chains, and this is more related to the disruption which can happen, and which it's not only COVID, but maybe you remember that a container ship which was across the Suez canal, which blocked the canal for, I don't remember, maybe 2 weeks, and then the supply chains of all sorts of things were really affected. Maybe no more, I don't know, green beans on the shelves of the supermarket, etc., etc. More important than green beans, most probably. And finally, modularization is a bit the situation in between, where you have some nearshoring, but in the same time you also have the possibility to have various scale of reorganization of the supply chain, mostly because of the use of digitalization, and data centers is a good representation of that. And this map that you have here is basically the distribution of large data centers across the world between the US and China. And on a worldwide basis, data centers are either Chinese or US infrastructures right now. And so if you need data to modularize your production, you have to choose then between China and the US to use the data for that. Okay. You also have the finance dimension of new risk mitigation. Clearly, I'm sure you had a number of seminars on finance. So I don't go into the detail here, but in the post-2008 finance world, you had a slowdown in certain flows and macro-financial regulation. And here, this is one segment of the... which segment is this? Sorry. Yeah, it's a portfolio investment, and the net equity on the liabilities. You have it. Well, here. Yeah, here. Net occurrences of liabilities and percentage of GDP. And you see that it went really down after 2008 here. It's plateaued and even went down afterwards. So there you have some deglobalization, but clearly you have other processes in other segment. Clearly with the ecological transition, the reorganization of finance up to Trump 2.0 was an important aspect as well, with after particularly Carney's famous speech in 2015, the speech on breaking the tragedy of the horizon, which put central banking into the climate risk. And so there is a whole trend for almost 10 years of changing the understanding of climate risk for finance. I don't go into the detail here as well. And then again with China as a target, the whole discussion of decoupling and what former US Treasurer Janet Yellen called friendshoring. Friendshoring is offshoring only for your friends. And this was the discourse of Janet Yellen in front of the Atlantic Council in April 2022. So here again, Biden was not better than Trump regarding China. Okay, now the third target is a framing of deglobalization in this more structural dimension of mercantilism and geoeconomics. First things first, mercantilism is not about accumulating gold or foreign surplus, if you want, or trade surplus. It's not about just a blunt protectionism, and this idea we have of mercantilism is mostly derived from just the attack of the pioneer of liberal economic thought, no one else than Adam Smith. This idea, this negative idea of mercantilism, you can find it in book 4 of The Wealth of Nations. But actually, when you read and when you go or you study mercantilism, you see that it's much more complicated than that. It's all about a strategic, selective, and differentiated state intervention, not only in trade policy, but in all other domains of the economic process. And why it is strategic, selective, and differentiated is because the target is not the exchange value, but it is the use value. So depending of the aims of economic policies, the intervention of the state will change. So if you want to increase, consumption of the poorest people, of the half poorest people of your economy, you will not have the same intervention as if you want to increase the share of rich people in your economy. The gold card that Trump just communicated is a way to increase the immigration of the richest and with higher skilled in the U.S. As long as you claim $1 million, it's basically on promises of $1 million, then you can have a resident permit in the U.S. And this is a mercantilist policy, which will not be the same as mercantilist policies of other countries. Okay? So now we can understand all those different policies within this broad and structural framework, but there is more specific scholarship, which is on state capitalism, which has taken over also the more liberal scholarship, which is called Varieties of Capitalism. I'm sure you have heard of it, Hall and Soskis. But state capitalism is a debate which takes place a lot also in Germany with scholars like Andreas Nölker, Milan Babic, Johannes Petri. I gave you those names here. And basically, they look at the national and sectoral variations of the involvement of the state in growth models, also the organization of capitalism more generally. And this is about also new forms of public enterprises and investment funds. And what is interesting is this was seen as specific of the emerging economies, and to see a bit how Brazil, India, China, of course, were able to have a very strong state involvement to reinforce the economic dynamics. But now you see some of those practices at the very core of capitalism, the US as well, with the US government buying shares of Intel, for instance. Now US government has 10% shares of Intel, the microchips firm, has also ownership of some of specific firms in rare earth, or there are discussion of ownership, share of ownership of the huge military-industrial complex of Lockheed Martin, you know, the F-35. So this is Lockheed Martin, and now the state government would like to just be owner, also a shareholder of those type of funds. Okay, this brings us to geoeconomics. So geoeconomics is basically a way, a more structural understanding of this relation between economic interest, state power, and the production of space. So the relation between economic interest, state power, and the production of space, makes us understanding, makes us understand a bit differently the relation between economic and political power on a worldwide basis. And the concept of geoeconomics, okay, it's quite old, but it has been renewed and put forward by a weird, odd guy who has been behind a number of very powerful people in the United States during the Cold War. He's from Poland originally, I think. Edward Luftwak, and very interesting guy. And so he wrote a piece in the month following the end of the Cold War in 1990, you see, pushing forward this new understanding of the world. So geopolitics is gone. It's the end of the Cold War. Now we are entering into an era of geoeconomics. And he defined the era of geoeconomics as the logic of war intersecting with the grammar of commerce. It's paraphrasing some well-known strategists. Okay. It's not only material, it's also discursive, the way we frame the understanding of a new economic rivalry intersecting these issues of interest, power, and space. And I just draw your attention to one concept which is often used now in these debates, the concept of weaponized interdependence. Have you seen this concept before? Yes? So you've seen everything. So it was put forward by some realist scholars in the US to understand basically how in a highly integrated world power comes not so much on the projection of military resources, etc., but on the ability to control either to control nodes of those networks, for instance, or to have a panopticon view of the whole network as such. And a good example is a SWIFT network for banking transactions. the US control the network, and they can themselves decide whether Russian actors, Iranian actors, North Korean actors can or cannot have access to this, the SWIFT network, which is absolutely necessary to have most economic transactions worldwide. Then you have other authors who try to have a more transnational understanding of this, with studies on new geo-industrial clusters. For instance, you can have Chinese firms buying Swiss pharma firms. It's not there for China to colonize Switzerland, but it's to gain basically intellectual property to have a broader economic industrial strategy worldwide. And finally, you have within these different debates on geoeconomics, you have other authors like, again, Lucas Lindsay and Hanna de Graaf from the Netherlands, who understand these new moves, if you want, as not so much as a rebalancing of power towards a more diverse world, but actually a reorganization of trade and finance to the benefit of making sure that the US remain supreme power in the organization of the world economy. Okay, so there's a lot, I suppose, with those three targets. So that's a lot of different processes underway with a condition which is still there. And of course, you maybe would like to have a more concrete example in illustration in terms of trade, production, finance, etc. I gave you a few, but I will not be able to give you all the detail. First of all, because I don't have time, and secondly, because I haven't done the job yet. So the only maybe in terms to conclude, it's important to take this step back from a Trump-C world. There is more than that. There is more than that. We need to take into account the historical context, and even this longue durée dimension and tension between transnational capitalism and a system of fragmented political authorities. This is maybe the first important lesson. And even if when it comes to this US-China rivalry, it's not so much about deglobalization than re-globalization. But re-globalization in the competition between a superpower trying to keep its status of superpower and an emerging power claiming a status within this power gains. And it's a re-globalization which has nothing to do with the re-globalization I discussed about with the World Trade report of the WTO. And then to have a proper picture of all this, of course, the devil is in the detail of the statistics, the indicators, and it's very tricky because you can choose just indicators which will make your point stronger and leave aside the others. So this is a bit the complicated and tricky part which remains to be done. Thank you very much.